Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to BathroomBrewsMTG, the YouTube channel where I'll take my bad ideas, and sometimes yours, and turn them into something you won't want to flush away. For the third deck of the holiday season, let's take a look at everyone's favorite group hug commander. And no, I don't mean the hippo. I'm talking about Kainos and Tyrio of Melodis. They're a 2/8 for 4 mana with the ability, at the beginning of your end step, draw a card. Each player may put a land card from their hand onto the battlefield, then each opponent who didn't draws a card. But we aren't playing group hug with this deck. Oh no. We're going to be playing Gaytes.deck. That's right, Gate Tribal, baby. Normally, Gaytes decks are 5 colors, since that would give us access to all of the guild gates, but with 4 colors, we're only missing a total of 5. So that's not too bad. However, I did select this commander for a few reasons. The first is it's both card draw and ramp in the command zone. Second, people will usually leave you alone if you're helping them out a bit. And third, we don't need our commander to win. It's there to facilitate the deck, not run it. Okay, with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get into the deck tech. First, let's talk about some of the important lands in the deck. Normally, I don't go over lands, but since this is a Gate deck and Gates are a type of land, I figured I should mention a few. The first one is Baldur's Gate. It's a legendary gate that is essentially a Cabal coffers, well, for gates. We can pay 2, tap it, add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of other gates we control. Now it does say other gates, so in order to be mana positive, we need to have at least 4 other gates out. For my math nerds out there, the formula for the amount of mana is 2x minus 4, where X is the number of gates we control. The next card is Maze's End, which isn't a gate, but it's one of the win conditions in the deck. For those of you who haven't seen this card before, it enters tapped, and taps for a colorless. But you can also pay 3 mana, return it to your hand, and search your library for a gate card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. If you control 10 or more gates with different names, you win the game. So be careful when you play this card, because it will put a target on your back pretty quickly. And since it isn't a gate, it won't synergize with the next card I'm going to talk about, or Baldur's Gate. One of, if not the best card in this entire deck is Gayte. It has this really cool ability that says, gates you control enter the battlefield untapped. So with this puppy out, all our guild gates become untapped duels. So is it guild gate becomes a volcanic island. So much cheaper than a volcanic island, actually. Quick rules note, if you're using a card like Circuitous Route to tutor out 2 guild gates and one of them is Gayte, that other gate will not enter the battlefield untapped, unfortunately. It's how the replacement effect works. Speaking of Circuitous Route, it's a 4-mana ramp spell that lets us put 2 basic lands and or gates from our library onto the battlefield tapped. It's a pretty straightforward ramp spell. I don't have much more to say here. Usually I'll get Gayte and some other guild gate that I need colors for, or Baldur's Gate. All really depends on the situation, but usually almost always Gayte. The next card is Explore the Underdark. It's a 5-mana Circuitous Route, but we get the initiative, so that's fun. And finally, Titania's Command. It gets us 2 lands from our deck onto the battlefield, and some other effects. You get to choose 2, and you can see the card here on screen. Of course, I didn't just add a bunch of 4, 5, and 6 mana ramp spells to the deck. Some of the cheaper ones I have are Expedition Map, Crop Rotation, and Sylvan Scrying. If you watched my last video, you would know about these cards, but I'll go over them real quick. Expedition Map, we can pay 2, tap, crack it, put a land from our deck into our hand. Crop Rotation makes us sacrifice another land as an additional cost, but we can put a land card from our deck onto the battlefield. Quick rules note with Crop Rotation, because it's an additional cost, that means if someone counted your Crop Rotation, you still have to sacrifice the land. It's happened to me before, definitely sucks. And the last card is Sylvan Scrying. It's 2 mana, 1 and a green, put a land card from our deck into our hand. Now I mentioned earlier that our commander is usually a group hug commander, so I decided to lean into that a bit. The idea behind it is we'll benefit from the lands and card draw more than our opponents will. So the first card is Rites of Flourishing. This lets everyone draw an additional card during their draw step and play 1 additional land each turn. Of course, since we're a lands deck, we'll be benefiting the most from this. If there is another lands deck at the table, you can choose not to play this card. That's okay. Next is Howling Mine. As long as it's untapped, each player draws an additional card at their draw step. Extra card draw is nice, and hopefully it'll help people deal with the archenemy, as long as it's not us. And then finally, Glunch the Bestower. This cute jellyfish from Baldur's Gate has flying, and at the beginning of your end step, choose a player. They put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature they control, choose a second player to draw a card, then choose a third player to create 2 treasure tokens. What's great with this is we can target ourselves with one of these abilities. I usually pick the treasures, and lets us focus down the archenemy. Again, unless we're the archenemy, in which case, don't play the cute jellyfish. How do we benefit from all these lands coming into play? Well, that's why I included Tireless Provisioner, Tireless Tracker, and Rampaging Baloths. Provisioner has a landfall, we make a food or treasure token. Tireless Tracker has a landfall, we make a clue, and it gets bigger whenever we sacrifice clues. And then finally, Rampaging Baloth has landfall, make a bunch of 4/4s. But aside from the value landfall cards, we can also burn people out. Kosi's Ravager, Spitfire Lagak, and Tunneling Gayte all have landfall, deal 1 damage to each opponent. Well, Kosi's Ravager is technically deal 1 damage to target player, but we're a Gaytes deck and we're playing a bunch of lands, so why not include these? Now, I said we're a Gayte deck, and aren't there Gayte payoffs? Well, yes. So let's get started with the creatures. First, Gatebreaker Ram. This thing gets bigger for each gate we control, and if we have 2 or more gates, it gets Vigilance and Trample. The biggest we can make this thing with just lands is an 18/18 Vigilance and Trample. Pretty beefy. Next is Archway Angel, which gives us 2 life for each gate we control when it enters the battlefield. And then we have Gate Colossus. This is an 8 mana 8/8, which costs 1 less for each gate we control, and when a gate enters the battlefield, you can put it from your graveyard on top of your library. This is a repeatable 8/8 that we can keep playing over and over again, and if it gets late game, we can be playing it for free. Some of the non-creature payoffs are Gates Ablaze, which is a 3 mana board wipe that deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of gates we control. Notably, this generally won't kill our Gatebreaker Ram, because it gets +X for each gate, and this deals damage equal to each gate, and the Ram already has 2/2 base power toughness. So that's nice. Next is Crackling Perimeter. This is a 2 mana enchantment that lets us tap an untapped gate we control, deal 1 damage to each opponent. Now, if you can add Seedborn Muse to this deck, which I did not, but is in the upgrade section, you'd be able to deal a ton of damage every turn to your opponents. I did include Wilderness Reclamation to combo with this. It's not as good as Seedborn Muse, but it's a lot cheaper, so that's why I included it. The next gate payoff is Guild Summit. This is a 3 mana enchantment that lets us tap any number of untapped gates we control and draw a card for each gate tapped this way when it enters the battlefield. And whenever a gate enters the battlefield under our control, we can draw a card. See all the gate payoffs and other cards I haven't mentioned in this video? You can click the link for the deck list in the video description below. Speaking of deck lists, I will also include my personal Gates list, which I used as the inspiration to build this list. Winning with this deck is going to be pretty straightforward. We're either going to use Maze's End, we're going to fire a giant fireball at someone's face, or everyone's face, or we're going to burn them out with landfall triggers or Crackling Perimeter. Before I wrap up this video, let's talk about some upgrade options. Some of the first that come to mind are Seedborn Muse, which I just mentioned, Burgeoning, and Exploration. Seedborn Muse will let us untap all permanents we control during each player's untap step. Burgeoning is a 1-mana enchantment that lets us play lands whenever an opponent puts a land into play, which is really good synergy with all those group hug cards we have, because it lets our opponents play additional lands. And the last one is Exploration. It's a 1-mana enchantment that lets us play an additional land on each of our turns. Again, this was a little too expensive for the deck, but if you have one or can trade for it, I would definitely include it. And with that, thanks for watching. I would like to have a special shout out for my first patron ever. Their name is 3 Raccoons Fighting Over a Pizza. That is an absolute stellar name. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to join them in supporting the channel, I'll have a link for the Patreon in the video description below. If you want to keep supporting for free, just give this video a like if you liked it, dislike if you didn't, leave a comment with any deck suggestions or feedback, subscribe, and ring that bell to get notifications when all my videos go live. As always, this has been Ben with BathroomBrewsMTG, and remember, always wash your hands.